For a very long time, the earth was quiet. It was a time before cities, before stories, before anyone knew what a word was. The wind moved through tall grass, waves hit the rocks, animals called out to one another. But the human world was silent. For almost 500,000 years, our kind walked the planet without voices, without language, without a way to truly say what we felt inside. Imagine that. Generations were born, lived, and died without ever hearing another person speak a word. There were sounds, of course, cries, laughter, grunts, and sighs. But no real language, no way to shape a thought into sound and give it to someone else. Humanity existed, but only like a whisper lost in the wilderness. They lived close to the earth, moving through forests, plains, and mountains. Each day was about surviving, finding food, building fires, keeping away from cold and danger. Their hands were strong and rough from carving stones into tools. Their eyes were always searching, alert to every shadow. They had no names, no stories, no songs. Only life itself, raw and wordless. When the night came, they sat close to their fires, their faces glowing in the flickering light. The stars above looked down, billions of bright eyes staring at creatures who could not yet speak. The fire crackled, an ancient rhythm that filled the silence. Maybe one of them looked up and wondered just for a moment what those distant lights were. But they had no words to ask, no way to share the thought. It lived and died inside their mind, like a spark that never found wood to catch. There must have been moments of deep connection, the look in someone's eyes when danger was near, the sound of a child's cry, the warmth of hands sharing food. These small acts were their language. Everything they felt had to be shown through actions. A touch meant comfort. A frown meant fear. A shout meant run. They survived like this for ages, bound not by words, but by instincts. The world was changing slowly. Ice ages came and went. Great herds of animals roamed across frozen lands. Humans followed, hunting and gathering, always moving. They learned to use fire, and that changed everything. Fire was warmth, safety, and light. It kept the darkness away. It was the first tool that felt almost alive. It breathed, it danced, it could grow or die. Around the fire, people began to gather closer. For the first time, there was something that pulled them together not just for safety, but for comfort. Around those fires, something else started to grow, a kind of awareness. The silence was no longer enough. Maybe one of them started to make a sound, trying to mimic the cry of an animal or to call another person's attention. It wasn't a word yet, but it was a beginning. Maybe it made others laugh, or maybe it scared them. But the sound stayed in their minds. Time went on. More sounds were made. Some meant food, others meant danger. These small sounds became symbols, not yet language, but close. The human brain was learning, evolving, trying to connect sound to meaning. Slowly, the silence of thousands of years began to break. Imagine the first moment two people understood each other through sound, not just by gesture, but by a noise that meant something, a sound for come or no or look. That small understanding must have felt like magic. For the first time, a thought had escaped from one mind and entered another. That was the beginning of everything. But for a long, long time, it was still mostly quiet. Villages didn't exist yet. There were no stories, no songs, just small groups moving through the world, learning by trial and error. The earth was huge and the people were few. Every mountain, every forest, every river was new and wild. Their lives were short and hard. Every day was a test of endurance. But they kept going, kept learning. They made tools sharper, fires stronger, shelters safer. They learned which plants healed and which killed. Every lesson was passed down, not by words, but by watching and doing. Children learned by copying, not listening. The world's knowledge was stored in memory, movement, and habit. Still, something inside them was changing. Their brains were growing, their thoughts becoming more complex. They began to feel emotions they couldn't show: curiosity, wonder, loneliness. They must have looked at the stars and felt small but aware. The silence that once protected them started to feel heavy, like a wall between one mind and another. Deep down, humanity was waiting to break through that wall. And then came art. The first human marks appeared on cave walls, handprints, animals, shapes, colors. They weren't words, but they were communication. They said, "I was here." They said, "Look at what I saw." These images were the first signs that humans wanted to be remembered, wanted to share something deeper than survival. Those paintings still exist today, silent messages from people who lived tens of thousands of years ago. When we look at them, we can almost hear their thoughts. The silence of 500,000 years finally had a voice, not in sound, but in symbol. It was the first hint that humanity was waking up. Maybe around that time they began to hum, to sing softly, to imitate the sounds of nature. Music may have come before language, rhythm before speech. Around the fire, someone may have started to tap stones together, another clapped, and slowly, a kind of harmony formed. It was a way to connect, to feel togetherness. That's how humans started to find their voice, and not in words at first, but in shared sound. Over the centuries, these sounds evolved. The throat, tongue, and mouth learned to shape air into meaning. The brain learned to understand patterns, to link them with thoughts. And slowly the long silence began to fade away. If we could go back and stand among them at that moment, we might not understand their speech, but we would feel the importance of it. We'd see their eyes light up as they realized that sounds could express what their hands could not. We'd feel the power of connection, the joy of finally being understood. That moment, when silence broke, was not loud. It didn't come with thunder or fire. It came quietly, like dawn breaking after an endless night. One human spoke and another understood. That was the start of everything that would follow. Stories, knowledge, inventions, civilizations. The human race, once silent for so long, had found its first true voice. We often look at the modern world, with its machines, cities, and noise, and forget how long it took to get here. But if you listen closely, beyond the engines and screens, there's an ancient echo inside us all. The memory of that first sound, that first word, that first spark of understanding. It reminds us that everything we are today began with a single idea, the desire to connect. The long silence of early humanity was not wasted time. It was the deep breath before the song of civilization began. It was the gathering of strength before speech, art, and progress could exist. That silence shaped us. It taught patience, awareness, and the value of connection. And when we finally broke it, the world was never the same again. The earth had waited for a voice, and when it came, it was human. It started quietly, just a sound, small and uncertain. Somewhere on a plain covered with tall grass, a group of early humans moved together, searching for food. The wind blew softly, carrying the smell of rain. The sky was wide and endless. Life was hard, but something was changing. Something invisible was taking shape inside their minds. One of them, maybe a hunter, maybe a mother, made a sound that wasn't like the usual cries or calls. It wasn't a warning or a shout or the sound of fear. It was different. It meant something. It carried a purpose. For a moment, the others paused. They looked up, and then one of them understood. Just a little, but enough. That was the first spark of meaning. The first voice. No one wrote it down. No one can ever know what that sound was. Maybe it meant come or food or help. But it was more than a sound. It was a bridge between two minds. For the first time, a thought that lived inside one person's head crossed the air and landed in another's. That small connection changed everything. At first, it must have felt strange, almost magical. Until that moment, humans had only used gestures, pointing, grunting, or showing. But this was different. It was faster, clearer, alive. They had found a new way to share what was inside. The silence that had lasted for hundreds of thousands of years began to crack open like ice in spring. Soon, others started trying to make their own sounds. They copied each other, repeating noises that seemed useful. Some sounds made people come closer. Others warned them to stay away. Bit by bit, a small collection of shared sounds was born. This was not yet language as we know it, but it was the seed. As generations passed, the sounds grew. Humans began to notice patterns and that certain noises could mean certain things. They taught these sounds to their children, who made them clearer and sharper. Over time, the air around human fires was no longer silent. It was filled with sound, the start of human speech. Imagine the excitement of those early people. For the first time, they could tell someone about danger before it arrived. They could share where food was found or warn others about a storm. Life became easier, not just because of tools or fire, but because of communication. They could plan, remember, dream together. Words made cooperation possible. One person could explain an idea, and another could improve it. Together, they could build things, hunt smarter, survive better. Humanity began to move beyond instinct. They were no longer just reacting to the world, they were shaping it. But language didn't just change how humans survived, it changed how they felt. Now they could speak of love, fear, and hope. They could comfort a child with a sound instead of just a touch. They could express sadness when someone died or joy when the hunt was good. Their world became deeper. Around the fire they started to talk. Simple sounds, short sentences. At first it was just about the day. What they saw, what they caught, what they feared. But soon talk became more than survival. It became storytelling. Someone began to describe the great hunt, the animal that got away, the dream they had the night before. The others listened, eyes wide, hearts beating. And when the story ended, they remembered. That was the moment humanity discovered the power of stories. Words could keep memories alive. They could turn one person's experience into everyone's knowledge. The old could teach the young without showing them, just by speaking. For the first time, information could travel through time. Language became a kind of magic. With words, humans could describe things that weren't even there. Things they imagined, things they dreamed about, things that existed only in their minds. They could talk about tomorrow, or about something that happened long ago. No other creature on Earth could do that. And slowly, humans began to change. Their thoughts became clearer. Their communities grew stronger. They started giving names, not just to objects, but to feelings, to each other, even to places. Naming something gave it meaning. It was a way of saying, this matters, I see it. I understand it. The world around them started to take shape in their words. The sun became the bringer of light. The moon became the watcher of night. The river became the giver of life. Nature turned into story. The universe that once seemed silent and mysterious began to make sense through sound. And as they spoke, they began to dream bigger. They imagined spirits in the trees, voices in the wind, powers that guided them. Belief and imagination were born through language. The first myths began, simple, powerful tales about the world and their place in it. These early stories were not just entertainment. They gave people comfort. They explained why the sun rose and fell, why rain came, why life began and ended. The human voice had become more than just noise. It was emotion. It was memory. It was identity, and once it began, it could not stop. Every generation added more sounds, more words, more meaning. Different groups developed their own ways of speaking. When they met other tribes, they shared sounds, borrowed words, learned from each other. Language grew like a living thing, flexible, changing, spreading across the world. But even as words multiplied, the memory of silence remained somewhere deep inside. Maybe that's why humans have always loved quiet places, forests, oceans, open skies. It's a reminder of where we came from, of that long time before we spoke. Still, there was no turning back. The voice had awakened, and with it came the unstoppable rise of human thought. People began to pass on lessons more clearly: how to make fire, how to hunt, how to build. They began to teach, not just show. Knowledge no longer died with one person. It lived in words, then came song. Once people had enough sounds and rhythm, speech turned into music. Voices began to rise together in celebration, grief, or hope. Around the fire, groups hummed and chanted. The first songs were not written or planned. They just happened, flowing naturally from the heart. Singing made them feel united, alive, part of something greater. Through voice and song, early humans began to understand that sound could heal, comfort, and inspire. A soft voice could calm a crying child. A strong voice could lead a hunt. A beautiful voice could lift spirits after hardship. The human voice became the most powerful tool on earth. From this small beginning, from that one sound, that first word, everything else would follow. Culture, science, art, religion, technology. All of it started because one human decided to speak. It's strange to think that the entire history of humanity, every book, every song, every speech, began with one uncertain sound in the wild. That small spark of communication became the foundation for everything that would come next. When we speak today, when we tell a story, whisper a secret, sing a song, we are carrying that ancient fire forward. The fire that began when the silence was broken. The fire that made us human. The first voice didn't just change the world around us. It changed the world inside us. It gave shape to thought, form to feeling, and purpose to life. It connected one heart to another. And once we found that connection, we never stopped searching for more. That is how humanity awoke. Not with engines, not with machines, not with power, but with a voice. A voice that rose softly from the quiet of the earth, spreading across time, growing louder, clearer, and more beautiful with every generation. It all began there, in the moment when silence turned to sound and thought became word. The moment we first spoke, once humans found their voice, everything started to move faster. The world that had once been quiet and simple began to fill with the sound of hammers, footsteps, and dreams. People started to build, not just with their hands, but with their minds. They had learned how to talk, and now they wanted to create. They could share ideas, plan together, and imagine things that did not yet exist. The first villages appeared, small groups of huts made from mud, stone, and wood. Fires burned in every corner, glowing through the night like stars on the ground. For the first time, humans were not just surviving the world, they were shaping it. Fire became their greatest companion. It cooked food, gave warmth, and protected them from wild beasts. But fire was more than just heat. It was power. People began to experiment to see what else fire could do. They noticed that when certain stones were placed in fire, something amazing happened. The stones melted and changed. From those glowing rocks, they pulled out shiny metal. It was the birth of a new age. Metal changed everything. At first, it was soft copper, easy to shape into small tools. Then came bronze, stronger and sharper. Later came iron, hard as stone and lasting as time itself. With metal, humans could build tools that never existed before. Stronger axes, sharper blades, better weapons, and durable plows. Every spark from the forge carried a piece of the future. Villages grew into towns, and towns became cities. People began to trade not just goods, but ideas. The voice that had once called out across the grasslands now echoed through busy markets and crowded streets. Everywhere there was movement, creation, purpose, but with progress came ambition. Humans wanted more land, more comfort, more power. They began to build walls to protect what was theirs, towers to show their strength, and monuments to remember their gods and leaders. The earth started to change shape under their hands. Rivers were redirected. Forests were cut down. The first roads were carved into the ground. Each discovery led to another. With bronze, they made stronger tools. With iron, they built larger cities. And then came steel, the metal that would define the modern world. It was fire's child, born from heat and human skill. Steel was stronger than anything before it, and it changed how people lived. They built bridges, ships, and weapons. They made machines that could lift heavy stones, turning labor into art. Temples, castles, and palaces rose higher than anyone had imagined possible. Humanity was becoming unstoppable. But something deeper was happening too. As people built more, they began to dream more. They looked at the stars and wondered what lay beyond. They created art, music, and poetry to express the beauty and pain of being alive. They learned to write, so their stories could last beyond a single lifetime. Clay tablets, scrolls, and carvings began to speak for generations long after their creators were gone. Writing was a new kind of fire, a fire of memory. It kept knowledge alive even when voices fell silent. It allowed ideas to travel across time and space. The first words written on stone or clay were simple, names, numbers, prayers. But over centuries, those marks turned into literature, science, and history. Humanity had found a way to speak forever. The world began to hum with energy. Farmers worked in fields that stretched farther than the eye could see. Traders carried goods across deserts and oceans. Builders raised cities from the dust. The air was filled with the rhythm of progress, footsteps, hammers, songs. It was beautiful and it was powerful. Yet with power came conflict. The same tools that built homes could also destroy them. The same fire that cooked food could burn villages. People learned that creation and destruction were twins and always born together. And so humanity entered an age of kings and wars, of empires rising and falling. Still, the dream of creation never stopped. Every time a city fell, another rose. Every time a generation was lost, another carried the torch forward. The will to build, to grow, to push limits, it was part of human nature now. Then came the great inventions: the wheel, the plow, the sail. With the wheel, humans could move farther and faster. With the plow, they could feed entire populations. With the sail, they could cross oceans and connect worlds. Every invention began as a spark in someone's mind, a thought shared, tested, and passed on through voice and word. The builders of fire and steel were not just blacksmiths and workers. They were dreamers. They looked at raw stone and saw a wall, a bridge, a city. They looked at a mountain and saw possibility. They believed they could shape the earth, and then they did. Centuries rolled by, and human knowledge grew like a tree, its branches spreading in all directions. People discovered how to harness wind and water, how to build machines that worked on their own. The first water wheels turned slowly in rivers, grinding grain and lifting heavy loads. Then came gears, pulleys, and levers, simple machines that made great tasks possible. Every invention built upon the last. The world began to feel smaller as travel became easier. Merchants crossed continents. Ideas traveled faster than armies. Cultures met, mixed, and changed each other. Humanity was learning not just how to survive, but how to thrive. The heart of it all was always the same: curiosity. Humans wanted to understand the world around them. They studied the stars, the soil, the wind. They asked questions. Why does fire burn? Why do seasons change? What is life made of? And with every answer, new doors opened. Still, the sound of progress was not gentle. The world had once been filled with birds, rivers, and silence. Now it echoed with hammer strikes, the creak of wood, the clang of metal. The song of humanity was growing louder. But it was not just noise, and it was the sound of creation. Every ring of metal on metal was a step forward. Every spark a symbol of what humans could achieve when they worked together. From small fires in caves to roaring forges in cities, the journey had been long and full of struggle. And yet, even as they built wonders, humans never stopped dreaming. They wanted to fly like birds, to move faster than the wind, to reach places they had never seen. That dream, to go beyond, would one day bring about the greatest change of all. The builders of fire and steel laid the foundation for everything that came after, for science, for industry, for machines that would roar across the land and sky. But at this stage of history, it was still the human hand that shaped the world. Every stone placed, every beam raised, every spark made by hand. They were proud, but they were also humble. They knew that what they built could crumble, that fire could turn to ash. Still, they kept going, because building gave life meaning. It was proof that humans could rise from nothing and create something lasting. When you think about those ancient builders, the ones who first forged metal, who carved cities out of stone, you can almost hear their heartbeat in the rhythm of progress. They didn't know about engines or electricity, but their spirit was the same as ours. The same desire to move forward, to leave a mark, to turn silence into something greater. Fire taught us power. Steel taught us strength. Together, they shaped the world into what it is today. The age of the builders was not just about metal and stone. It was about imagination, courage, and the belief that humans could control their destiny. It was the time when the world began to wake up to its own potential, and soon that awakening would grow even louder. The quiet crackle of fire and the ring of hammers would one day become something far greater. The roar of engines, the hum of machines, the sound of a new kind of awakening. Humanity had gone from silence to voice, from voice to fire, and from fire to steel. The next step would be unlike anything before. The world was preparing for a storm of progress, invention, and noise that would change everything forever. The silence was long gone now. The earth had begun to tremble with human ambition, and the engines of the future were waiting to scream. The sound of hammers and forges slowly faded into something new, something louder, faster, and unlike anything the world had heard before. For thousands of years, humans had built with their hands, shaping stone and metal through sweat and patience. But now they were ready for something greater. They had mastered fire and steel. The next step was to give that fire a heart a moving, breathing heart made of metal and energy. It began with curiosity, as it always did. People wanted to move faster, to lift heavier things, to travel farther than their muscles or animals could take them. For generations, they had relied on the strength of horses, the pull of wind, and the flow of rivers. But deep inside, there was a new hunger, the hunger for power beyond nature. Someone somewhere noticed that steam, the white breath of boiling water, could move things. A simple pot lid rattling over a fire became the first sign of a revolution. It was such a small thing, but it carried a whisper of the future. People realized that if they could control that power, they could build machines that never tired, never slept, never needed food. And so the world began to change again. The first engines were built, loud, heavy, and clumsy, but alive. They coughed, hissed, and roared. Steam turned wheels, and wheels turned gears, and soon metal beasts rolled across the earth. The age of machines had begun. At first, it was slow. A few small factories, some iron tracks, a handful of inventions. But once it started, it couldn't stop. Steam engines pulled trains across countries, linking towns and people like never before. Ships powered by coal crossed oceans faster than wind ever could. For the first time, distance began to lose its power. The world was becoming connected, and it was all because of engines. Factories grew like forests of brick and smoke. In every corner of the world, people worked beside machines that pounded, spun, and pressed without rest. The air filled with the rhythm of industry. Not the soft sound of human voices, but the deep hum of invention. The planet that had once been ruled by silence now trembled with energy. Cities expanded overnight. Lights appeared where darkness once lived. Iron bridges stretched over rivers. Railroads cut through mountains. Everywhere the world was changing, faster than anyone could believe. The earth had never seen such motion, such speed, such noise. Humanity had awakened fully, and its heartbeat now matched the rhythm of the engines it had created. For many, it was a time of wonder. They could travel farther than ever, build greater than ever, dream bigger than ever. The steam engine became a symbol of progress, of hope and human strength. People believed that machines would make life easier, fairer, better for everyone, and in many ways they were right. But progress came with a cost. The same smoke that powered cities also darkened the skies. The same engines that carried people to new lands also carried weapons of war. The same machines that freed some, trapped others in endless labor. Humanity had woken up with engines screaming, powerful, unstoppable, but not always wise. Still, there was no going back. The fire of invention was burning too brightly. New ideas came faster than ever before. After steam came electricity, invisible, mysterious, and full of promise. Light bulbs began to glow, and for the first time, night could no longer hide the world. People worked through darkness, and cities sparkled like constellations on the ground. The hum of progress grew deeper. Inventions poured in one after another. The telegraph, the radio, the camera. Voices and images began to travel through wires and air. The world was talking to itself now. Humanity had found new ways to connect, not just through words, but through machines that carried their voices across oceans. And then came the dream of flight. Humans had watched birds for millions of years, longing to rise above the earth. Now, with engines powerful enough, they finally could. The first flying machines were fragile, thin wood, fabric, and courage, but they lifted from the ground if only for seconds. That was enough. The sky, once unreachable, had become the next frontier. From there, progress exploded. Every decade brought something new, something faster, louder, stronger. Cars filled the streets. Trains became faster. Ships became larger. Airplanes crossed continents. The planet, once vast and mysterious, began to feel smaller. Distance, which once defined human life, was shrinking before their eyes. The sound of engines became the new heartbeat of civilization. In every city, every port, every field, machines spoke the same language, and the language of motion. The silence that had once covered the world was gone forever. The earth now vibrated with human ambition. But amid all this noise, there was a strange feeling growing inside people, a mix of pride and unease. They had created something powerful, something that seemed almost alive. Machines could do things humans never could. They were faster, stronger, tireless. Yet they had no heart. They followed commands but felt nothing. And in that difference, humanity began to wonder what it truly meant to be alive. Still, people pushed forward. The industrial age turned into a new age, an age of electricity, science, and innovation. Factories became laboratories. Inventions became dreams. The human voice had become mechanical, amplified through engines and wires. Every new sound, the whistle of a train, the buzz of a motor, the rumble of a car, became a song of progress. Children grew up surrounded by machines and lights. To them it was normal, the sound of the future, but sometimes, at night, when the engines rested and the factories went silent, people could still feel the memory of the old world, the one before all the noise. The quiet forests, the whisper of wind, the calm of firelight. It was a reminder that progress always comes with trade. Humanity had gained power but lost something too, the stillness that once defined its early life. Even so, the world was unstoppable now. The engines that once ran on steam were soon powered by oil, then by electricity, and then by ideas. Humans learned to make machines that could think, machines that could move on their own. The speed of life increased again. In just a few hundred years, humanity went from walking barefoot on dirt roads to racing through the sky in metal wings. The same curiosity that made a child play with a spark of fire now reached for the stars. The engines had awakened something deep within us, the will to go beyond limits, beyond fear, beyond the horizon. But as the noise of progress grew, so did the realization that power alone was not enough. The earth groaned under the weight of industry. The air grew thick. The rivers turned dark. People began to ask themselves, was this what awakening truly meant? To fill the world with machines but forget the song of the wind and the whisper of trees? Some tried to find balance. They built gardens in cities, cleaner machines, quieter engines. They searched for peace within the noise, and slowly new dreams began. Dreams not just of power but of harmony. Humanity started to remember that progress was not only about speed or strength, it was about meaning. The engines had awakened the world, but they had also awakened human conscience. People began to think not only about what they could build, but about what they should build. Still, the journey continued. The engines grew faster, smaller, smarter. They carried humans across the sky, beneath the ocean, even beyond the planet itself. The same energy that once boiled water to move a wheel now powered rockets that touched the stars. The same spark that once lit a campfire now fueled entire cities. It was a long road, from silence to speech, from stone to steel, from fire to flight. Every sound, every invention, every idea had built upon the last. Humanity had truly awakened, and its voice now roared through engines that shook the ground and split the sky. But beneath all the noise, one truth remained. The engines were only as alive as the hearts that built them. Behind every machine was a human, curious, determined, dreaming. And that is what made it all beautiful. The silence of the past was gone, replaced by the thunder of progress. The world had changed forever. Humanity had awoken with engines screaming, not in anger but in triumph, in discovery, in wonder. The earth had never heard such a sound before, the sound of a species realizing its own power. And somewhere, deep within that roar, was the faint echo of the first voice, the same voice that had whispered across the grasslands so long ago. The voice that began it all. The world had changed. The engines that once screamed in wonder now filled every corner of life. The sound of progress was everywhere, in the streets, in the skies, in the heartbeat of every city. Machines roared, lights blinked, and wires carried voices faster than the wind. Humanity had conquered silence once and for all, but in doing so, it had created a new kind of silence, the one that lived inside the noise. Everywhere, people were surrounded by sound. The hum of cars, the buzz of electricity, the chatter of crowds. The earth, once ruled by wind and waves, was now ruled by motion and machines. The air itself seemed alive, trembling with energy. Yet somewhere beneath it all, something human was beginning to get lost. People had never been more connected, yet somehow they had never felt more alone. In cities filled with millions of voices, many began to realize how easy it was to disappear among them. The same technology that brought people closer also built walls of distraction between them. The voice that once carried stories beside the fire was now buried under the noise of modern life. Still, humanity kept talking, louder, faster, more often. Radios carried voices across oceans. Then came television, filling homes with moving pictures and sounds from faraway places. Families sat together, listening, watching, learning. The world was shrinking. The same human desire to connect that had sparked the first voice was now traveling through wires, screens, and signals. And then came the age of communication, the true age of voices. Telephones let people speak across continents. Messages could travel in seconds. Letters became emails. Conversations that once took months now happened in moments. The entire world had become a giant web of sound. It was a miracle in many ways. A farmer could hear the news from another country. A child could listen to music recorded by someone thousands of miles away. Knowledge was no longer hidden, it was shared freely. Humanity had finally found a way to make the entire planet speak as one. But with this new power came a strange problem. The voice of the individual began to drown in the crowd. Everyone was speaking, but fewer were listening. People talked across the world, but often forgot to talk to the person beside them. The noise that once represented progress now began to feel heavy, like a constant storm of words. Images and sounds that never stopped. Still, deep within the noise, human voices tried to rise. Voices of art, kindness and truth. Musicians turned the hum of cities into songs. Writers turned confusion into meaning. Teachers, thinkers, and dreamers tried to remind people that the human heart was still the most powerful machine of all. Even as the world grew busier, some people began searching for silence again. Not the ancient silence of caves and forests, but a silence inside the mind. They wanted peace, a place to think, to breathe, to remember what it meant to be alive. Meditation, reflection, and nature began to call humanity back. It was as if the earth itself whispered, "Remember me." But it wasn't easy. The noise was everywhere, in pockets, on screens, in ears. People woke up to it, worked to it, and fell asleep to it. The hum of electricity had become the background music of life. Yet something remarkable was happening. Beneath all that sound, humanity was still learning. The world of communication brought not just noise, but understanding. People could now see and hear others from across the globe. They could learn about different cultures, beliefs, and lives. The planet was full of new perspectives. Voices that had been silent for centuries were finally being heard. In villages, towns, and cities, ordinary people began to speak out, through microphones, through cameras, through the written word. The power of speech that had once belonged only to kings, priests, and rulers now belonged to everyone. A single voice could reach millions, and that changed everything. Voices began to shape the world. They inspired movements, challenged injustice, and spread hope. Words became stronger than weapons. Songs became stronger than walls. Humanity was learning that its greatest strength had always been its ability to communicate, to feel together, dream together, and change together. But even then, the struggle continued. As voices multiplied, truth became harder to hear. The noise was not only in the machines, it was in human hearts too. People argued, divided, shouted over one another. The world was full of talking, but short on understanding. Still, every generation tried to find balance. They searched for a middle ground between the chaos of sound and the calm of silence. They tried to build a future where technology and humanity could live side by side, not fighting but listening. The 20th century became an era of discovery and expression. People created music that spoke of love, war, hope, and freedom. They made films that reflected dreams and fears. They built libraries filled with the voices of centuries. The human story was now written, recorded, filmed, broadcast, and for the first time shared with the entire world. Through all the noise, one truth remained. People still longed to be heard, not just by machines, but by other hearts. Behind every radio voice, every television face, every written word, there was a human soul reaching out, saying, "I am here. Do you hear me?" That was the real beauty of the modern age. That beneath the roar of engines and the hum of machines, there were still millions of human stories being told. Every word spoken, every song sung, every message sent. It was all part of the same story that began with that first voice thousands of years ago. And as the world entered the digital age, those voices multiplied again. Now everyone carried a small piece of the world in their hand, a device that could connect them to anyone, anywhere, anytime. The noise became infinite. The flow of information never stopped. The world had become louder than ever, but something else happened too. People began to look inward. They began to realize that the true power of the voice wasn't in how far it could travel, but how deeply it could touch. It wasn't just about speaking. It was about being understood. In the middle of traffic, in crowded rooms, on glowing screens, people started asking themselves, what is real connection? They began to search for meaning, not just messages. They wanted to listen again, to others, to nature, to themselves. The world, once thrilled by the sound of engines, now started to crave the sound of sincerity. Human voices began to rise once more, quiet but powerful. They spoke of love, healing, and understanding. Artists wrote songs that reminded people to feel. Poets spoke of simplicity. Thinkers asked the world to slow down. The same species that once created endless noise was now trying to rediscover the beauty of quiet. And slowly, something began to change. The noise didn't vanish, but people started to find their own silence within it. Some turned to nature, to the sound of rain, to the wind through trees. Others found peace in small conversations, in laughter, in shared moments that didn't need machines at all. Humanity was remembering what it had forgotten. That connection was not about sound, but about presence. In a world full of screens and signals, the most powerful thing became something simple: listening. The ability to listen, to truly hear another person's voice, became rare and precious again. And through that, humanity began to heal. We had gone from silence to noise, from whispers to engines, from stillness to constant motion. But inside all of it, the human heart was still searching for one thing: understanding. The engines had awakened us, the machines had carried us forward, but only our voices, our real human voices, and could remind us who we truly were. And so, the story continued. The earth still hummed with energy, the city still glowed at night, and the world still buzzed with countless voices. But somewhere inside all that sound, there was a quiet truth waiting to be heard. That even in the loudest age of history, the smallest human voice could still change everything. The human race had filled the planet with noise, but deep down it was still listening, waiting to hear the sound that mattered most. Not the engines, not the machines, not the endless chatter, but the sound of understanding, the sound of compassion, the sound of one human voice reaching another. And in that moment of true listening, the world was silent again, not with emptiness, but with peace. The engines had been roaring for centuries. The world had grown faster, brighter, louder. Humanity had reached places once thought impossible, across oceans, through skies, even into the stars. The earth had become small under the reach of human hands. Cities sparkled like constellations at night, and voices echoed through invisible networks that wrapped around the planet. But as the noise of progress filled every corner of existence, something subtle began to stir once again. Something quiet, something ancient. It was the same silence that had existed before the first human word was ever spoken. It waited patiently, like the calm after a long storm. For the first time in generations, people began to wonder where the journey was leading. They had built everything they could: machines, towers, networks, worlds within screens. The engines had carried humanity far, but the question grew louder in their hearts: what comes after the noise? Technology had become a mirror, showing humans not just their brilliance but their restlessness. They could connect to anyone, anywhere, yet still feel distant. They could build machines that thought faster than the mind, but not hearts that felt deeper. The world was full of answers, but somehow people were still searching for meaning. The human race had reached a new kind of edge, not a physical one, but a spiritual one. It was as if all the progress, all the sound, all the light had led back to the same question that started it all: who are we? In quiet rooms, people began to ask themselves if all the speed, all the growth was really what they wanted. They missed slowness gone, the sound of rain, the feeling of soil under bare feet, the beauty of a quiet morning without screens or engines. They missed being part of the world, not above it. So slowly, a shift began, small at first, almost invisible. People started planting trees again. They built gardens on rooftops, filled cities with green spaces, and tried to give back what centuries of progress had taken. Others began to design machines that worked with nature, not against it. The old silence was returning, not as emptiness, but as balance. Even technology began to change. Instead of just chasing power and noise, humans began to seek harmony. Machines were built to learn, not to replace, to help, not to dominate. The goal was no longer to control the world, but to live in rhythm with it. Humanity was beginning to remember something it had almost forgotten: that progress without heart was just noise. Real progress came from understanding, kindness, and respect. For life, for Earth, and for each other. The world that once shook with engines was beginning to hum softly, like a giant heartbeat. It was not silent, but peaceful. The noise had become music. The chaos had turned into rhythm. In this new age, people began to look back at their long journey. They saw the footprints of their ancestors stretching across time, from the silent caves to the roaring cities. They saw how every voice, every discovery, every mistake had led them here, and for the first time they didn't feel pride or shame. They felt gratitude. They realized that everything they had built, from fire to steel to engines, had always been about the same thing: the search for connection. From the first spoken word to the digital signals flying through the air, it was all driven by one simple desire: to reach each other. And now, with all the tools and power in their hands, they were beginning to understand that connection was never about speed or noise. It was about presence. It was about being truly here, truly listening, truly caring. The world began to slow down just a little. People learned to turn off their machines and look at the stars again. They sat together, face to face, sharing stories without screens. They listened to the wind, to birds, to their own breathing. The engines still existed, but they were no longer the center of life. They were just tools, background hums in a larger symphony. It was as if humanity had gone in a great circle, from silence to voice to fire to steel to noise, and finally, back to silence again, but a wiser silence this time. A silence that knew the value of sound. Some called this the Second Awakening. It wasn't about invention or conquest. It was about understanding. People had learned to fly, to build, to create beyond measure, but now they were learning something even greater: how to be still. They began to see the earth not as a machine, but as a living being, one that had always been speaking even when humans weren't listening. The whisper of trees, the song of waves, the deep hum of the planet. All of it was language older than words. And finally, humanity was quiet enough to hear it. The engines still screamed across the skies sometimes, carrying people to new lands, even other worlds. But inside those ships, people looked out the windows and felt something different. Not pride, but awe. They realized that no matter how far they traveled, their home was not just Earth. It was life itself. In the end, the story of humanity wasn't just about tools, or noise, or machines. It was about the spirit that kept moving forward. The endless curiosity that made people explore, create, and dream. It was about how they turned silence into music, and noise into meaning. Generations later, children would ask their elders about the old world. The time when everything was loud. When smoke filled the air and people forgot to listen. And the elders would smile softly and say, "We had to go through the noise to understand the value of quiet." The children would sit in fields where once there were cities, listening to the sound of distant engines in the sky. And they would know those sounds weren't monsters anymore. They were part of a balance, part of the great echo that connected past and future, earth and sky, machine and human. The engines still roared, but now they carried hope instead of hunger. Humanity had finally learned that the greatest power was not in the sound of machines, but in the wisdom of the soul. And so the story ended where it began, with silence. But this silence was alive, filled with memory, filled with echoes. You could almost hear them if you listened closely. The voices of the first humans whispering across time, the fire crackling, the hammers striking, the engines roaring, the hearts beating. It was all one sound, the sound of humanity. From the first spark to the final whisper, it had always been the same journey. The story of beings who learned to speak, to dream, to build, to destroy, to heal, and finally, to listen. The world stood still for a moment, not in fear, not in emptiness, but in understanding. The engines quieted, the cities glowed softly, and the earth breathed peacefully beneath them. After 500,000 years of searching, the human race had finally remembered its voice. And this time, it wasn't screaming, it was singing, a soft, endless song, the echo beyond the engines.